All right, you guys. So, we do want you to text in questions. Somebody named Josh Baboom said, any question? And no, questions related to what we're talking about tonight. But it'll make the end of the night. Listen, you can have your phone out as you go. And if you're like, I don't even know what you just said, fire away. But please, we'll have that. That number is going to be like on every slide. So you don't worry about losing it. Also, you should have like 5 of those messages from that person. So you can go back and reference that too. All right, so week 1, chapter 1. We did the whole chapter. We read this verse in chapter 1, verse 19. Write therefore the things you have seen, those that are, and those that are to take place after this. And this is where the debate is. What are the things that have seen? This is past. What are the things that are present? And what are the things that take place after this? Future. And that is something that the church for the last 2,000 years has just gone, what? This is a tricky book to get into. And what's funny is, I was talking to someone before we got started. It was like, you could read this and then spend like a half day in it and feel like, oh, I think I've read some stuff and I've got it. And then you spend another day in it and you're like, oh no. And it just, that keeps happening. Like, you can spend years in it and you're just like, oh. And then I'll watch these theologians like who've spent years in writing commentaries, and they're like, you know. That's not to say that we should avoid it, and it's not to say that we should try to understand it. Jesus says, blessed is the one who reads this, right? So we should read it. We should try to seek and understand. And there are some implications for what you believe. But that's the part we're trying to figure out is so I'm going to throw an outline of the book of Revelation. But we were in that first week, which was a introduction, which was chapter 1. And then we spent the last 7 weeks in the 7 letters to the 7 churches. And then the next part is chapter 4 through 18. And it's like, what? And that's where a lot of debate is it's like, when is this happening? And then you get 19, the return of Christ. And it's like, okay, how, when, what? And then 20, which Chet is going to spend part 2 on of our tonight. His whole session is going to be really anchored out of chapter 20, which is the millennium. And it's like, when is this taking place? And then the return of Christ. But there's a lot of debate over chapter 4 through 18 into 19 and 20 of like, when is all this happening? And the reality is before you even get into the millennium, because what you're going to see is that when you actually look at Revelation 20 and you look at the millennium, how you actually understand what that is will affect how you go back to chapter 4 onward and figure out what's happening. So that's the kind of one of the keys here is trying to understand what's happening there. But even before you pick a lane on what you think the millennium is, there are actually 4 different lenses, 4 different views of interpretation that affect the way you read the book of Revelation. So think of it as one set of glasses. These are shades. It's going to shade everything. The next glasses, these are rose-colored glasses. It's going to be red. These are just clear glasses, but they're super, focused. I mean, just everyone's got a different lens that's going to affect the way you read a lot of the passages, especially chapter 4 onward. And we're going to look at this first session, those 4 different really views of how to interpret the book of Revelation. And those are preterist, historist, futurist, and idealist. So preterist, historist, futurist, idealist. There might be some pens. There should be some pens in the seat backs in front of you. If not, ask somebody beside you. But if you got those papers, you can run on the back, take notes. But if you're a note taker, there you go. We're going to walk through all 4 of those right now, starting with the preterist view. Okay. Preterist comes from the Latin word for past. So it just means past. Many of the prophecies in the book of Revelation, the idea of the preterist view, is that these have already been fulfilled in the past. Specifically, from John's vantage point, the understanding of the preterist view, from John's vantage point, they believe that this vision was recorded anywhere from 60 to 65 AD. And what John is being shown is imminent events that are about to happen between 67 and 70 AD, which is the Jewish-Roman War, culminating in the destruction of the temple. That's where a lot of these are going towards, is the destruction of the temple in the Old Testament, which, if you're not familiar with that, just to say, the destruction of the temple was a major event in Jewish history, like the biggest. It's a huge deal. In Christian history, it was a major deal. And a lot of times you don't think about it, but actually there are texts that are even foreshadowing this in the Gospels. Even if you're not a preterist, you can look at these and see these are foreshadowing the destruction of the temple. And preterists are going to say that either most of Revelation 4 all the way through 18, that was fulfilled already from John's perspective, looking forward to 67 to 70 AD, or there's another view called full preterist that thinks the entirety of the Revelation from 4 onward, all the way through the end, has been fulfilled, which we're going to get to that in a moment. But so there's kind of two different camps in the preterist view. There's a partial view and there's a full preterist view. Now, for the partial, we're going to get to the full, and I'm going to say it briefly, but the spoiler alert, it's a bad view. The partial preterist view actually is held, some of you are like, what in the world are you talking about? People actually believe this. Yeah, absolutely. And good, godly, wise people believe this. R.C. Sproul, who I mean, he died a few years ago, but I love R.C. Sproul. His stuff is great. R.C. Sproul was a partial preterist. There's a guy named Doug Wilson who is out west. He's not much influence here, but he has some influence online and out west. Doug Wilson's a partial preterist. A renowned theologian across the world, N.T. Wright, is a partial preterist. So they're actually, you can hold this view as a Christian. Absolutely, you can. And what they're going to argue is that when Jesus says, this generation will pass away until all these things are fulfilled, this language is like, yeah, because it's about to happen in this generation. In a few years, it's about to happen. When Jesus says in Matthew 16, truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. When it says in Matthew 24, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. In Luke 9:27, when he says, truly, I tell you truly, there are some standing here who will not taste death. The language of the time is at hand. The night has almost passed. The Lord is at the door. All of this language, they're going to say, yeah. And they were expecting all this to happen because it was about to happen. And they're going to argue and say, yeah, now, let me dismiss the full preterist view very quickly. Jesus has not already come. The new heavens and the new earth, that has not already taken place. So what happens is sometimes preterists get maligned by just, oh yeah, well, people that hold a preterism, and it's like, whoa. I would argue full preterism is actually an unorthodox view. And by unorthodox, I mean it's outside the camp of orthodoxy, meaning if you hold that view, it's going to be a tough time holding to Christian faith. In fact, the Apostles' Creed, which was the creed that binds the church together in church history for the last 1,700 years, is he who shall come to judge the quick and the dead, right? So around 300-ish AD, they write this creed, and this is what all the Christians at the time believe, and they're saying Jesus hasn't come yet. And that's an orthodox creed that binds us all together. So we dismiss full preterism, it's gone. If you do hold that view, please come talk to me. But there are probably some of you that hold to a partial preterist view. This is absolutely a defensible view of looking at this. So when they're going to look at the prophecies of Daniel, Matthew 24, Revelation 4, all the way through 18, they're going to say, yes, that was fulfilled up into the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. And then they'll say chapter 19, Jesus comes back, 20 millennium. There's some variants and views there. But that's the preterist view, okay? The strength of that view is I think it takes very seriously the imminent return of Christ in the minds of Christians at the time. You read the language of the New Testament, and they're very much like, he's coming, soon, he's coming. So it takes that very seriously, and it takes that very literally, and builds a eschatological end times view around that. Now, here's what I'd say some of the weaknesses of this. Much of the early church fathers and early church history were in agreement that the book of Revelation was not written around 60 to 65 AD. They actually will say that it was written during the period of Domitian. In fact, just to show your cards, we said that week one. This was written from 81 to 96 AD, in that reign of Domitian, who was the emperor that persecuted Christians in that time period. And that's when we look at the end of John's life when he wrote this. So if that's true, that immediately discredits partial preterism. Now, they're going to argue, and they're going to make good arguments to push back on that, but early church history was more in agreement that this was written after, because you can't actually say that this happened before the fall of the temple if it was written after the fall of the temple. So that's one of the weaknesses of preterism. I would also say that there's passages like Revelation 2:4. So when I taught the letter to Ephesus in Ephesians or Revelation 2:4, he says that you've abandoned the love that you had at first. And if that's written really right around the same time the letter to Ephesus was written, so that Ephesians was written, if those are written at the same time, and if you read Ephesians, and there's some pretty encouraging language in it, and you read the book of Acts, and you see the speech that Paul gave to the elders, the Ephesian elders, he's very encouraging there. It would be hard to imagine that pretty much very quickly they've abandoned their faith, and the sharp rebuke that shows up in the book of Revelation. It makes more sense that a generation has passed. I would make that argument. And to answer some of the partial preterist expectation of the kingdom coming, the language that gets used today is the language, the kingdom is already but not yet. So when Jesus ascends into heaven, the kingdom is already here, but it is not yet fulfilled until his coming. But again, there's some godly, wise preterists holding views, partial preterists. They're going to push back on that. So, all right, what I'm going to do with each, I know this is a lot. Again, see that number at the bottom? Fire away, you guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one passage, and I'm going to use it and I'm in every single view, and I'm going to interpret it from their view so you can kind of see how this plays out a little bit, okay? So this passage is from Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 18. This is the passage that is about the mark of the beast and the number 666, which some of you may be familiar with that language. Here it comes. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So, a preterist view is going to go, yeah, actually, the number 666, if you take that, the Roman emperor Nero at the time that was persecuting Christians in 60 to 65 AD, Nero, if you take his name in the Greek and you transliterate that into Hebrew, meaning you take the Greek characters and you move them into Hebrew characters. In Hebrew language, there are numerical values assigned to different letters in the Hebrew language. And if you add the transliterated name of Nero into the Hebrew and you calculate it, it comes to what number? 666. And they're going to argue and say, it's definitely talking about Nero. That's because all of this is happening right then. And this is Nero in his evil reign. And Nero at the time was persecuting Christians, and if you wanted to be a part of polite society, it was not good to be a Christian. So that's the language that they're going to push on and say, this is the preterist understanding. So that's preterism. The next view is the historist lens. So put those glasses off. We are no longer pre-70 AD. Pick up the historist glasses. All right. Now we're looking at Revelation differently. This view believes that Revelation surveys, so from 4 to 18 onward, it surveys the entirety of church history from the moment the church begins until he returns and makes all things new. So once you read past chapter 3 and you're in chapter 4, they're going to say that each of these images that we get in the vision are corresponding to real moments in church history, and those get charted out over time. Now, there aren't a lot of people that hold this view today. And then you're like, okay, well then why are you mentioning it? Glad you asked. It is because pretty much the entirety of the reformers held this view. So from about 15th century to about the 17th century, this 18th century, this was the view. And so when you interact with thought And these are, I mean, this is Wycliffe, Tyndale, Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, Melanchthon, John Knox, John Wesley, Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield. I mean, these are people that we look to all the time for insight. They all held this view. And what they do is they would take a passage like Revelation chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. And that says, "Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, 'Come!' And I looked, and behold, a white horse. And its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer." What they're going to say is that corresponds to a specific moment in history, and that is when the barbarians sacked Rome. So when the Roman Empire fell, that's what this is pointing to. So when they get to Revelation chapter 9, in Revelation chapter 9, verse 3, it says, "Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given power like the power of scorpions of the earth." All right, maybe you've heard that before, right? The locust and the scorpion. All right, so they would say, yes, this happened. And that was actually Muhammad in the Islamic Revolution and the expansion across the Arab Empire, of the Arab Empire. And they say that is pointing to that moment in church history, that specific moment. And then, one of the most prominent features of historism, the historist view, is the language of the beast, or they're going to use the language of even the Antichrist, which is actually not in the book of Revelation. We'll find that out a little bit. They're going to say that actually is the Pope. So when you read their writings, the Pope is the Antichrist over and over again. And it makes a lot of sense from their perspective because the Pope was killing a lot of reformers and persecuting. So some of the features. Now, the strengths of the historist view. The strength of this position is that it really does try to understand the events of the book of Revelation from the perspective of the seven churches. I think what happens a lot of times is when you read the book of Revelation, you read it with a you-centered lens, that this is from our vantage point in the future. And I think the strength of the historist view is that it goes, no. This is written to a very specific people with a context, and this is coming from their vantage point forward. So I think there's some strength in trying to do that. I think there's just a general strength. It's just some of the sharpest theologians that have ever lived have held this view. And I think that should be considered. Now, here's some of the weaknesses. I mentioned some of the things that are agreed upon in the historist view. There's a lot they don't agree on. A lot. So when it comes to trying to correspond different events to different time periods, they are all over the place. There's not widespread agreement at all. I also think a weakness of the historist view is, even though they did a good job of seeing it from the point of the seven churches and they're looking forward to the future, a lot of the interpretations really come towards their time period. And I think that's a problem for everyone when you're doing Revelation, is they see it from their time period. So a lot of it is about the Pope. A lot of it's about the Catholic Church. So let's take that case study where it says, "And it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Some of the things they're going to argue is that the mark is actually the Latin Mass. That's an argument that is made. That so back in the day, commoners, they spoke German, they spoke English, you spoke your language. You didn't speak Latin. You had to be highly educated, and most people weren't highly educated, or you had to be a part of the Catholic Church as a priest or as a cardinal, and you knew Latin. So people would go to Mass, and they wouldn't understand a word that was being said. It was all said in Latin, and they couldn't hear it. And not that they were really preaching the gospel, but if they had a chance to hear it, they couldn't even hear it. And so they're saying, this is the secret mark. And the Catholic Church holds the power, and they're the ones that if you go against them, like, it's going to go bad for you. So that's a historist interpretation of that passage. Now, like I said, there aren't a lot of people that hold this view anymore. I think I saw somebody in the comments of a video recently, because one thing you're going to see, again, there's the number behind us so you can text questions. Chet and I are really, really deep into this right now, so apologies if I'm moving fast. We don't have a lot of time tonight, but your head gets spinning. And I think I found someone in the comments who said, I hold this view. And it's like, you are like one of like a million. But the reason I say that, I want to expand your understanding that there are godly Christians that hold a different view. And these reformers were godly, wise Christians, and they held a different view than many of us hold. All right, let's get to a view that I think probably is the majority view in the room, if I had to guess, and it's definitely the majority view of our time period, and that is the futurist view. The futurist view, so put down the historist lens, no more Pope, Antichrist, pick up this lens. All right, now we're thinking futurist. It looks at Revelation 4 onward as a series of events that happen in the future when Christ comes back. And it's really just from it's from every standpoint of church history, but it's our standpoint too. So Revelation 4 onward is future for us as well, because this is when Christ comes back. Right around the time he's going to come back, this is when all of Revelation 4 onward is going down. This is one of the most popular view of our times. All right, it wasn't popular 200-300 years ago. It wasn't popular years before that, but it is very popular now. Now, notable holders of this view. You've already heard the name. Some of you may have heard the name Scofield before, in the Scofield Bible. That's a specific brand of futurism that we're going to get into a little bit later. But Scofield, today Chuck Swindoll, John MacArthur, David Jeremiah, Tim LaHaye, and Jerry B. Jenkins of the Left Behind series, which honestly, that is one of the major reasons that the futurist view is so widespread, is because of the Left Behind series. That, even some of you who may not even know what that is, that thing was massive. So massive that like Seth Rogen has a parody movie based off of some of the stuff that's in the Left Behind series, right? That's how culturally widespread, and part of the reason why futurist is very popular today. Most Baptists and Pentecostals, Calvary Chapel churches, E-Free churches, very, very popular view. And I would say that if you have church background and you read the book of Revelation, it is very possible that you have a futurist view. And I could just, by scanning the room, as I was talking about the preterist view and seeing some of the somewhat horrified faces, that you probably have this futurist view, that it's like a what? That there are other people don't have this? Yeah, there's a lot of different views. And we're going to look at the most popular one right here in a moment. So, the futurist view. It looks at from the vision from 4 onward as future things. And there are a few different branches of how that plays out. And how you understand the millennium is going to be even more important to how you understand the futurist view. But that's what Chet's going to do. And Chet's going to answer all of your questions about the millennium and the second part. But that just means that when you pick up the Bible and you take Revelation 4 onward, you are seeing a bunch of future views. Now, here are, I think, some really good strengths of the futurist lens of understanding the book of Revelation. It has a fairly cleaner layout from chapter 4 onward, especially chronologically. So there's some neatness to it where it's like, yeah, okay, well then this happened. Some of the systems that get built out of futurism, that they have kind of a clean, straightforward chronology. It's like, no, this makes sense. I think they try to they have a heart for being literal and trying to understand the Bible literally, and they have a discomfort for anything that would try to spiritualize the text, and they're trying to take the text very seriously and understanding what's happening here. And I think there's some strengths, absolutely, in the futurist view. Here are some weaknesses. Oftentimes, and specifically in a specific branch of futurist understanding, it gets accused of what's called newspaper exegesis. And that's the idea that some people in the futurist view are, every news headline that comes out is a reason for pause and panic. It's a reason for, oh no, what's going to happen next? So now that Israel is in a tussle with Iran, it's like, oh no, is it happening? And some of these get even to further extremes where they're trying to calculate up the exact time, and there's some things that it gets haywire very quickly. And I don't think that's a healthy perspective on the end times to have. Like the historical approach, I think that futurism a weakness is that it can be interpreted in light of your own times and not considering the rest of church history and really also considering the seven churches who received this letter. One of the weaknesses, I think, is that it oversells literalism. So I heard John MacArthur say, we just try to take the Bible literally, and we try to take this literally. But then when you hear some of them talk about it, they're going to say something about the beast, and the beast represents, and then I go, oh, whoa. What is it? What is the beast? What was the word? Represents. And you've moved out of literalism, right? Because if you're going to be consistently literal, you're going to consistently look at every picture and go, that's a literal, there's a beast coming out of the sea. Now, I found out from Ben Johnson that there are some people that believe that. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. But most futurists are going to say, no, this represents that. And I would say, then you've oversold literalism, because you have to take, if you're going to be consistent there. But at the same time, there's a heartbeat that wants to take the Bible literally. And I appreciate that about the futurist view. And again, I think they get hung up on certain details to the point where it can get to the point where Elon Musk is not. Elon Musk has been thrown around to be the next. He's the next one world order guy. So it can get out of hand, but that doesn't at all exclude the view itself, because when you get into the text, there's a lot of strength in this view. Now, let's get to the case study. Back to the text, Revelation 13, 16 through 18. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So a futurist, a futurist take on this text would say, yes, 666 represents the number of a future evil government leader like Nero. This is a future leader, and there's going to be a one world order where everything goes through this leader. So one world currency. So have you ever heard the chip in the hand? Yeah, that's this text. So if you want to buy things, be careful what you put in your hand, right? So that is a futurist text. We look at this and go, that's what's coming, and it's going to show up something like possibly this. Okay. Fourth, final lens, taking the futurist lens off, put on the idealist glasses. The idealist lens for viewing the book of Revelation, it views that Revelation does not give a single fulfillment of the past, the present, or the future, but as a broad repeating of recurring themes. So it is not only future looking, it's not historist, only history looking, and it's not past all the way pre-70 AD looking. It's not a single fulfillment. It is a set of themes that show up in church history, recurring over and over and over again. So, notable figures who held the idealist lens of looking at Revelation. Augustine, so one of the biggest church fathers. Augustine, the theologian Richard Mounce, G.K. Beale, Anthony Hoekema, Richard Bauckham, and I know some of you are like, who were they? Listen, in Bible nerd world, these are big deals. Like, we're talking, these are the pros. These are the guys that Bible nerds go, man, like at real nerdy Bible conferences. Like everyone's trying to surround them and try to talk with them. So you would never notice who they are, but nerd world, they know exactly who these guys are. And they hold this view, and they teach this view. And it shows up in their commentaries. So they're going to use the language that Chet used earlier of recapitulation. And what they're going to say is that recapitulation happens throughout Revelation 4 onward. So the visions, they're going to say, overlap and repeat themselves. So this happens here in church history, and this happens here in church history, and this happens here in church history. Some of them can blend some views, and they can say that actually there might be a progressive view, a progressive intensification of events that happen. So it's happening here in the book of Revelation that corresponds to these moments in history, and then build up towards when Jesus is coming back. So they would look at the beast in the book of Revelation. They would go, yeah, absolutely, makes a lot of sense. 666 calculates to Nero. Also, that shows up in Domitian. Also, that shows up in Hitler. and may show up in another future leader. Because what this is actually teaching here is the recurring themes of those who hold power and are evil and use that power to persecute the church and his people until Jesus comes and makes all things new. So, so in the word tribulation that we're going to hear a lot tonight, they're going to view that tribulation happened when Christ ascended on high and the church began. The tribulation started. Same thing with historists. They're going to look at the tribulation started. Futurists are going to look at the tribulation thinking for the tribulation that's going to come. But they're going to say, the idealists are going to say, no, the tribulation has been happening, and these events we see in the book of Revelation are just a recurrence of events that happen over and over again. So, strengths of this view. Those that hold this view are not going to be confined by headlines in the online or in the newspaper or in history books. And they don't have to keep everything pre-70 AD. Okay? This allows for some flexibility, I think, in trying to understand these symbols, because when you try to peg them down, it gets very, very complicated. So I think there's some strengths in that approach. Some of the weaknesses in the idealist approach is that they can get a little loosey-goosey with the text. And just every now and then it's just like, yeah. I mean, if there was a lens that you're picking up, it is the rose-colored lens, where it's like, yeah, I mean, it could be Nero, and it could be Domitian, it could be Genghis Khan. I mean, it might be Hitler. I don't know, man. Like that. That's some of the weaknesses is that, and they get accused of spiritualizing the text, overly spiritualizing the text, where it's you're not actually taking the text literally, you're spiritualizing it, and sometimes that can go too far. Okay, last case study. Revelation 13 again. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. An idealist interpretation there would go, yeah. 7 in the scriptures is a holy number. It's a number of completion. So having 666 is really the opposite. This is an evil. This is less than. This is symbolic of the human evil condition that really shows up most when the evil, powerful men over time flex their power and persecute those who are weak, especially the Church of Jesus Christ. And they would say, and of course, at any given moment in history, there's going to be men that control and men that rule and reign in evil ways. So that is the idealist. Now, those 4 lenses are pretty much it as far as how you read it. We're going to get to it in a moment. We're going to take a break, because I know your minds are like, my mind's like this. It's like I need to sit for a second and breathe. But we're going to take a break. But this is going to be helpful for how we think about what we're about to talk about next, because think of these as lenses, but also really broad, major categories of interpretation. And then some of these are going to kind of touch on some of the views of the millennium, maybe even a couple and a few at a time. They're going to touch on how you understand the millennium that is to come. And that's what Chet's going to talk about next. But those are the lenses. If you have some questions, please text those in. Take about 10 minutes, get yourself some coffee. You might need some coffee right now. Get yourself some caffeine, get yourself some food, and we'll be back in 10.